In this video, we're going to take a look at the Panasonic Lumix G7, which in many ways is a sister camera to the Panasonic GX85 that we looked at last week. And we'll give a special thanks to B&H for loaning me both of these two cameras to review for you guys. And I will put links in the show description if you were interested in learning more. The G7 is in many ways like the GX85. However, there are some big differences as well. Under the hood, they're very similar. They both feature a 16 megapixel Micro Four Thirds sensor that is capable of shooting 4K video, and the biggest difference is the form factor on each one of them. The GX85 is like a smaller rangefinder type camera, whereas the Panasonic G7 is much more like a small DSLR, which I actually preferred, to be honest with you. I think it handles well, it is very comfortable to use, and coincidentally it is probably the most lightweight camera I've ever shot on. It is largely plastic construction, but it does not feel cheap. It does feel very solid. But I actually think this could be beneficial to somebody who does a lot of shooting where they have to handhold for long periods of time, like shooting events or maybe street photography. It's a very light and comfortable and easy to use camera. A couple other things that I really like is the button and knob layout on the G7 is wonderful. Everything is very comfortable, very easy to get to, and I think one of the highlights, and I think one of the things that Panasonic is so good at, is giving plenty of custom function buttons. And so the idea behind having custom function buttons is you can tie functions in the menu and you can map that to one of these buttons. So for instance, if you want to have a way to change white balance really easily, you can assign it to whatever button you want, hit that button, and it goes right into the white balance menu. You can do that for lots of stuff. And what's really cool is between that and the touchscreen menu, you have an option of up to 10 custom function buttons, and I think that's a pretty big deal. The other thing that's very cool about the G7 is it does feature a fully articulating screen, which is a huge help. It's very beneficial when you're shooting video or anything that's an awkward angle. I don't know why all cameras don't have that. The GX85 is only partially articulating. You do have a flash on this camera, although that's nothing really to write home about, but if you shoot video, one thing that's cool is you do have at least a microphone input. And so if you want to use an external mic and put it in hot shoes, something like the Rode Video mic, that is very easy to do. Each camera actually comes with a different kit lens. The GX85 comes with the 12 to 35 kind of pancake form factor zoom lens, and the G7 comes with a 14 to 42 zoom. Both lenses are actually quite nice and very impressive for kit lenses. Usually kit lenses are something you get and you want to replace pretty quickly. Both these are very usable. They're not the widest aperture for low light applications, but in terms of sharpness, both of them do an excellent job. One key thing that might make a difference to some people is that the 14 to 42 does have a focus collar as well as a zoom collar, whereas the 12 to 32 does manual focusing by just using touch points on the touchscreen. In using the G7 for still photography, it performed exceptionally well. And when you compare that to the GX85, there is a slight difference in that they both use the same 16 megapixel sensor. However, the anti-aliasing filter has been removed in the GX85 model. Now, the advantage to that is that you get a slightly sharper image, even though you may be more susceptible to moire patterns and things like that. And that's a pretty common thing that camera manufacturers do in their lineups. So it really depends on what you're shooting. Now, I did some A/B testing between the two of them, and as you can see in this sample here, that there is a slight favor to the GX85 in terms of sharpness. Now, this is cropped in, or you're zoomed in 100% on this, and when you zoom back and look at the larger image, it's a fairly small difference between the two. And so I'm just making the point that the G7 is a very sharp camera. There's just a slight edge in sharpness to the GX85. Now, having said that, I actually prefer the G7 slightly as a stills camera. And a lot of that has to do with the form factor and the way it just fits in my hand. For me personally, it's just a more comfortable camera. There's less weight. It has a slightly bigger bulk to it. It has a better grip to it. And the GX85 doesn't have those things. So a lot of this is going to come down to personal preference and what you actually prefer. Now, low light performance on stills, you can get around some of this. Now, it is a Micro Four Thirds camera, so by nature of the sensor being smaller, it is more susceptible to noise at higher ISOs and darker lighting conditions. However, Panasonic does get around that because you do have optical image stabilization in the G7. Now, you do have a better image stabilization system in the GX85 because it uses a full 5-axis in addition to the 2-axis image stabilization that's in the lens. But for stills photography, photography, I really didn't find it very crippling. I think the slowest you're going to be able to handhold it is about 1/8 of a second, and that's going to be rare because your subject needs to be still, so that's going to be reserved for things like macro photography or still life or still moving, non-moving objects. So I think that's one thing to consider, but I think that being able to shoot at much slower shutter speeds because of the image stabilization does help. Now, as I mentioned, this doesn't have quite as advanced an image stabilization system, and you have to have a lens attached that supports image stabilization, but it does work pretty nicely. In terms of speed, I think both of these cameras are pretty comparable. I mean, if you're going to shoot sports or something like that that requires you to do a lot of shots at a lot of fast motion, I think these cameras probably aren't going to be your first pick. I mean, you get about 8 frames a second in terms of speed, but once the buffer fills up, it starts slowing down considerably. Now, one thing I do like about the way Panasonic handles this is that once the buffer fills up, it just slows down the shutter speed, so you can continue to shoot. It's not like it locks up and won't shoot until the buffer's cleared. So they did a good job on that, but I just don't think these are just like speed demons in terms of performance. As a stills camera, I'm very impressed with the G7. In fact, I think it is absolutely outstanding as a stills camera. As a video camera, I'm a lot more frustrated, and in many ways I share a lot of the common frustrations that I had with the GX85, and I'll link that video below. But I did a whole video on the 4K recording on that, and I think that in some ways, the spec sheets and the marketing say one thing, and yes, it doesn't overheat, and you can record up to 29.9 minutes of 4K video on these, but there are things that they don't include, and I think it may be kind of intentionally from Panasonic, and I think that's what I find frustrating. And the reason I say this is because when Panasonic released the GH4 a few years ago, that was one of the groundbreaking cameras of all times in terms of being able to use it as a stills camera and then turn around and do video. It was very robust. And I think we're looking at Panasonic to try to provide the next generation of that, which they really haven't done. There hasn't been a GH5 yet. There are rumors, but it has not been released. They do release these, slightly less expensive bodies that claim to be doing 4K recording and all these great things, and then there's things that are missing. Now, one good thing about the G7 is you do get a microphone input on this, which at least it's there, and you can use an external mic. You don't have that on the GX85. Now, on the GX85, you have the built-in image stabilization, which is just a godsend when you're doing video, and you don't have that on the G7. So I think it's just really interesting. If you want to use 4K video on here, yes, it does deliver if you're in the right lighting conditions. If it's bright enough, it does look outstanding. Another slight problem on these is the continuous autofocus does not track anywhere near as well as things like Sony or even what Canon are doing. The main reason for that is because Sony and Canon are both using phase detection autofocus points. In fact, Canon, starting with the 70D, started using this dual pixel technology, which is really accurate. It locks on and it holds. I find a lot of hunting and seeking with these because it's contrast-based autofocus, and especially if you're in low light or if you have something bright in the background, it really has trouble focusing, especially even with facial recognition included. And so I think for some of those reasons, as a video camera, it is slightly frustrating. So to kind of conclude this, I would recommend either one of these models, the G7 or the GX85. I think they are excellent stills cameras. And if you're looking for a very economical way to get into a micro four thirds system, I think both of them are winners. I think just in terms of still capabilities, they are excellent. I've really been happy with that functionality of it. For me personally, I use both stills and video, and the video stuff is just kind of frustrating to the point where I just don't think it's there yet for me, and it's hard to recommend that. In fact, it's also hard to recommend it to somebody who even wants to do some casual video, because you're shooting 4K video, and it is a lot less casual than shooting HD because the size of the image is 4 times the size of HD, so your files are bigger. It takes more time to process them in the computer. Editing becomes slower, and so there's a whole workload around, or workflow around, doing 4K video that makes it a little more difficult. So if you're interested in these as a stills camera, definitely check them out. I think if you're into it for the video capabilities and the ability to go back and forth between two functions, I just think you're going to be left a little disappointed. So anyway, if you guys enjoyed this video, please remember to like it, share it, and subscribe to The Art of Photography. Special thanks to B&H once again for loaning me these two cameras to play with. I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.